3 Days of Valentine. Episode 2, Chapter 1, A New Season Begins. The morning sun cast golden rays through the open windows of the buka as Morenike wiped down the wooden tables. The scent of frying akara filled the air, mixing with the lively chatter of early customers. It had been a week since she sent her letter to Ileayo through a travelling trader. Every day she prayed for a reply, but none had come yet. Still, she held on to hope.
Morenike!
Mama Kemi's voice rang from the back. We need more firewood for the stove. Morenike quickly dried her hands and picked up the basket. As she stepped outside, she heard a familiar voice. So, you really work here? She turned sharply. Damilola stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. Damilola, she greeted cautiously. What are you doing here? He smiled. I came to check on you and to bring news. Her heart pounded. News? He hesitated, then sighed. It's your mother. Fear gripped her chest.
Is she?
She is alive, he reassured quickly. But she fell ill a few days ago. Some say it's from worry. She has been longing to hear from you. Morenike's breath caught in her throat. I sent her a letter. Did she get it? Yes, but she is weak, Morenike. She needs to see you. Tears burned her eyes. She had longed to return home, but how could she? She had nothing, no money, no means. As if reading her thoughts, Damilola stepped closer. I can help you. I have some money saved. I can take you back. Morenike's mind raced. Could she really return? Would Babaluku let her be? What if it was a trap? She shut her eyes, whispering a prayer. Lord, what do I do? A gentle peace settled over her heart. She opened her eyes and met Damilola's gaze. When do we leave? Episode 2, Chapter 2, The Journey Home. Morenike's heart pounded as she stuffed her few belongings into a small wrapper. She had barely slept since Damilola brought the news of her mother's illness. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, joy, fear, and uncertainty. Mama Kemi stood by the door, arms folded. Are you sure about this, my dear? Lode hard. Mama needs me. I must go. I understand, but be careful. You know how people talk, and Babaluku, he will not be happy to see you. I nodded. I know, but I trust God. Mama Kemi smiled, pressing a small envelope into her hand. Take this. It's not much, but it will help. Tears welled up in Morenike's eyes as she hugged the woman who had become like a second mother to her. Thank you for everything, Mama. God go with you, my child. By midday, she and Damilola were seated in an old, dusty bus, rattling its way toward Ileayo. The road stretched endlessly, bordered by lush green trees and scattered farmlands. The rhythmic hum of the engine blended with the voices of passengers, some chatting, others dozing off. Morenike stared out the window, memories flooding her mind. She had left Ileayo with nothing but fear in her heart. Now she was returning with faith. Damilola's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Are you scared? She turned to him, hesitating. A little. What if things haven't changed? What if Babaluku still wants to force me into marriage? Damilola exhaled. He might try, but you are not the same girl who ran away. You have grown, and you have God on your side. She nodded, gripping her Bible tightly. Yes! Hours later, as the bus approached Ileayo, Morenike's stomach twisted. The sight of the familiar dusty paths and small mud houses filled her with nostalgia. Children ran barefoot along the roads, and women balanced bowls of foodstuff on their heads. Nothing had changed. As they stepped off the bus, whispers followed them.
Is that name back? She came back?
Her heart pounded as she hurried toward her mother's hut. Damilola stayed close, his presence reassuring. At the entrance she paused, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Her mother lay on a thin mat, looking frail and weak, but when she saw Morenike, her eyes filled with tears.
Mommy!
Morenike fell to her knees, grasping her mother's hands. A weak smile crossed Mama's lips. You came back. Tears streamed down Morenike's face as she nodded. I'm here, Mama. I'm home. Chapter 3, Shadows of the Past.
Trainers?
Morenike held her mother's frail hands tightly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. Mama's once strong frame was now thin, her cheeks hollow. Yet in her weary eyes there was warmth, a silent reassurance that she had been waiting for this moment. My daughter, Mama whispered, her voice barely above a breath. You came back to me. Morenike nodded, pressing her forehead against her mother's hand. Forgive me for leaving, Mama. I never wanted to go, but... Mama placed a weak finger on her lips. You did what you had to, and God kept you. Damilola stepped back, giving them space, but Morenket felt his presence like a shield. He had been her support through this journey, and now as she faced the past she had run from, she was grateful he was near. A soft cough racked Mama's body, and Morenike quickly reached for the bowl of warm water by the bedside, dipping a cloth and pressing it gently against her mother's forehead. You need to rest, Mum. I will take care of you now. Mama managed a weak smile. You always had a heart of gold. Morenike sat by her side, whispering a silent prayer. Lord, heal her. Restore her strength. Let me not be too late. The whispers outside the hut had grown louder. Morenike could hear them, old women murmuring, young girls giggling, men speaking in hushed tones. She returned just like that. After shaming Babaluku, she is bold. Oh, what does she think will happen now? Mora ignored them, but she knew the real battle was yet to come. The next morning, as she stepped outside to fetch water, a familiar figure stood by the pathway, Babaluku. Her breath hitched. He was older now, but the intensity in his gaze remained. His tall frame loomed over her as he took slow, deliberate steps forward. So, the lost sheep has returned, he said, his voice deep and commanding. Morenike straightened her shoulders, gripping the water bowl tightly. I came for my mother. Babaluku scoffed. Did you think you could leave without consequences? That you could disgrace me before the village and return as if nothing happened? She swallowed hard, her heart pounding, but she stood firm. I did not disgrace you, Baba. I chose my own life. His eyes darkened. That was not your decision to make. Demila appeared beside her suddenly, his presence like a wall between them. She owes you nothing, he said firmly. Let her be. Babaluku's gaze flickered to Demila, his expression unreadable. Then he chuckled. Ah, so this is the one. He turned back to Morenike. We shall see how long you think you can escape your fate. With that he walked away, leaving behind a tension so thick that Morenike could barely breathe. She turned to Damilola, her hands trembling. He will not let this go. Damilola placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then we will stand in prayer. You are not alone, Morenike. God is with you. She exhaled, gripping her Bible. Yes, God is with me. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Episode 2, Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village as Morenike carried a bowl of water back to her mother's bedside. The encounter with Babaluku had left her shaken, but she would not allow fear to grip her heart. Mama was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady, though weak. Morenike set the bowl down and took a moment to watch her. How much time did she have left with her? A knock at the door startled her. Damilola stepped in, his expression troubled. Morenike, we need to talk. She turned to him, noting the seriousness in his eyes. What is it? He hesitated before speaking. I have been hearing things. People are saying Babaluku is gathering the elders to bring up the matter of your past betrothal again. Morenike clenched her fists. But that was years ago. I was a child then. I never agreed to marry him. I know, but in their eyes it was still a sealed matter. You shamed him by leaving. Now that you're back, they believe you must answer for it. A cold chill ran down Morenike's spine. What does that mean? Damilola's face darkened. It means they might try to force you into a decision, one that you don't want to make. Morenike took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the wooden table. I am not that helpless girl anymore. I belong to Christ now. No one owns my destiny except him. Damilola nodded. Then we must pray and prepare. The following evening, a village meeting was called at the elders' square. Morenike knew it was about her. She walked into the gathering with Damilola by her side, her heart steady but aware of the piercing eyes watching her. Babaluku stood among the elders, his presence commanding. His voice boomed across the square. We have all gathered here today to settle an old matter, one that concerns the honour of this village. Murmurs rose among the people. The elders nodded in agreement. Babaluku continued. Years ago, this girl was promised to me. It was agreed by her father before he passed. She defied that agreement and fled, bringing shame upon our traditions. Now that she has returned, it is only right that she fulfills what was set in place. Moreniket took a step forward. With all due respect, I was a child, and I never consented. My father may have made arrangements, but he is gone. I choose my own path. Baba Luku's face darkened. You do not have that choice, girl. Damilola stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. She does, by law and by God's word. No one should be forced into marriage. The elders whispered among themselves, uncertain. Baba Luku's voice dropped dangerously low. Then tell me, Morenket, if you are so certain about your faith, where was your God when your father died? Where was he when you suffered in the city? You returned here, broken, with nothing to show. If your God is real, let him prove it. A deep silence settled over the gathering. Moreniket took a step forward, her eyes blazing with unshaken faith. He has already proven himself. I was lost, but he found me. I was broken, but he is restoring me. I was abandoned, but he never left me. My God is alive, and I stand in his power. Gasps filled the air. Even the elders seemed taken aback by her boldness. Baba Luku clenched his fists. You have made your decision, then? Morenik held her ground. Yes, I have. I belong to Christ, and no man will dictate my future. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, an elder nodded. The girl has spoken. Let her be. Baba Luku's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned and walked away, his back stiff with anger. Moreniket exhaled. The battle was not over, but for now, she had won. Damilola leaned toward her. You stood firm, she smiled, her heart swelling with peace. And I will keep stand. Episode 2, Chapter 5, Trials by Fire. The night air was thick with tension, even after the village gathering had ended. Moreniket could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching her as she walked home. The decision she had made, publicly rejecting Baba Luku's claim over her, was not without consequences. Damilola walked beside her in silence, his hands clenched at his sides. He had seen the fire in Baba Luku's eyes before the elder left the gathering. There was no way a man like that would simply accept defeat. Are you afraid? Damilola finally asked. Moreniket glanced at him, her eyes steady. No, but I know this is not over. You are right, he admitted. Baba Luku is not the type to let go easily. He has power in this village, and he will use it. They reached her house, and Moreniket paused at the doorway. The oil lamp inside cast a dim glow through the small window. I will pray tonight, she said softly. Whatever happens, I know God is with me. Damilola nodded. I will be praying too. Be careful. As she stepped inside and bolted the door, she allowed herself a deep breath. Her mother was still asleep, her weak form barely rising with each breath. Moreniket knelt beside her and whispered a prayer. Father, you have brought me this far. I will not turn back. Strengthen me for what is to come. Cover me and my mother with your protection. I surrender everything to you. Let your will be done. A deep peace settled over her heart as she stood up and prepared for bed. But just as she lay down, a sound outside made her sit up abruptly. It was the sound of footsteps, multiple footsteps, moving stealthily in the darkness. Moreniket barely had time to react before she heard a loud bang on the door. Open this door, you foolish girl! A voice snarled. Her heart pounded. She recognized the voice instantly, one of Baba Luku's men. She rushed to her mother's side, placing a protective hand over her. Leave us alone, she called out. Another loud bang. You think you can disgrace Baba Luku and go free? You are a woman, Mabe, whether you like it or not. Fear threatened to creep in, but she clenched her fists. I belong to Jesus. No man owns my destiny. There was an angry murmur outside, then a sudden loud crash as the men forced the door open. Mornik backed away, shielding her mother as 3 men stepped inside. The oil lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows on their faces. Take her! One of them ordered. Moreniket gasped as strong hands grabbed her arms. She struggled, kicking and shouting. Jesus, help me! She cried. Suddenly a loud voice rang out from outside. Let her go! The men froze. Damilola burst into the house, followed by 2 other young men from the church. He held a wooden staff in his hands, his face burning with righteous anger. If you lay another hand on her, you will answer to the whole village, he warned. The attackers hesitated. They knew Damola was respected among the youth. If a fight broke out, they would not have the advantage. Babaluku will hear of this. One of them spat before shoving Morenike aside and storming out with the others. Damitla rushed to her. "Are you hurt?" Morenike shook her head, though her body trembled. "They were going to take me." His jaw tightened. "They will not stop until they break you or you give in. We must take this to the elders again. This time they must make a final judgment." Morenike took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No, this battle is not against men. It is spiritual, and I will fight it on my knees." Damitla watched her, seeing the unshakable fire of faith in her eyes. "Then we will pray," he said firmly, "and we will not stop until victory comes." That night, the small house was filled with the sound of fervent prayers. Unknown to them, Babaluku sat in his compound, seething with anger. If he could not have Morenike willingly, he would find another way. Episode 2, Chapter 6, The Gathering Storm. The sun had barely risen when the news spread through Abako village like wildfire. Babaluku had summoned the village elders. The matter of Morenike's defiance was no longer a private issue, it had become a public dispute. Damila and the other young believers in the church knew this was not just a battle of words, it was a war. As Morenike sat in her small hut watching over her frail mother, she felt the weight of what was coming. She had defied tradition. She had challenged a man feared by many, but most importantly, she had chosen to stand for God. Would he stand for her? She closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, you promise that those who trust in you will never be put to shame. I will not be afraid. Let your will be done." A knock on the door startled her. It was Damilotla. "They are calling for you," he said quietly. "The village square is full." Stood, her heart steady. "Then let us go." The village square was packed. Elders sat in a semicircle, their faces stern. The villagers whispered among themselves, watching as Morenike and Damila approached. Babaluku stood in the centre, his staff planted firmly in the ground. He was dressed in his finest agbada, his wealth and influence on full display. "Daughter of Adun," one of the elders called, his voice heavy with authority. "You have been accused of rebellion. Babaluku has laid a claim over you, and you have refused. Do you deny this?" Stepped forward. "I do not deny it. I belong to no man except the one my God chooses for me." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some women nodded approvingly, while others gasped at her boldness. Babaluku's expression darkened. "You are a stubborn girl. Do you think your church can save you from the consequences of disobedience?" Morenike met his gaze without fear. "I do not fear you, Babaluku. I fear only God." One of the elders cleared his throat. "The customs of our land must be respected. If Babaluku has chosen you, who are you to refuse?" Damila stepped forward, his voice firm. "Elder, with all due respect, our customs do not override the will of God. Morenike is not property to be claimed. She is a daughter of the Most High." A few younger men nodded in agreement. The elders exchanged glances. Babaluku's influence was strong, but the church's presence in the village was growing. "You are playing with fire," Babaluku sneered. "If you defy me, Morenike, you will suffer." Morenike took a deep breath.
"I am ready."
For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then the eldest among them, Baba Molu, spoke. "This matter is not to be forced. A woman must choose freely. If she refuses, so be it." Babaluku's lips pressed into a thin line. He had lost for now. The elders dismissed the gathering, and as the crowd dispersed, Morenike turned to Damilola. "It is not over," he nodded. "No, it is not. But you have won today." Unseen by the villagers, Babaluku walked away, his mind already plotting his next move. The storm was far from over. Episode 2, Chapter 7. The Price of Defiance. Morenike returned home to find her mother sitting up, looking more alert than she had in weeks. The news of her daughter's defiance had reached even the sick and elderly in the village. "You stood up to Babaluku," Adun said, her voice barely above a whisper. Morenike knelt beside her and took her hands. "I could not do otherwise, Mama. I belong to God." A slow smile spread across Adun's face. "Your father would have been proud." Tears welled up in Morenike's eyes. She had barely known her father before he passed, but her mother often told her how strong and godly he had been. Rest now, Mama. God will take care of us. But even as she said it, a cold feeling settled in her chest. She had won the battle at the village square, but she knew Babaluku was not the kind of man to accept defeat. And she was right. That night, a strange stillness filled the air. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and an eerie silence hung over Abakor. Morenike had just finished praying when she heard it. A shuffle, a whisper, the rustling of leaves, a loud bang on the door. Her mother stirred in the corner, coughing weakly. Morenike placed a calming hand on her before rising to her feet. The banging grew louder. "Open this door, you foolish girl!" It was Babaluku's voice, and he was not alone. Morenike's heart pounded as she stepped closer to the door. "What do you want? You dare to ask?" Babaluku barked. "You have insulted me before the entire village. You have embarrassed me, and for that you must pay." Morenike stood her ground. "I owe you nothing. Leave my home." A cruel laugh rang out. "You think you are safe? You think your prayers will protect you?" Suddenly, a stone crashed through the window, shattering the wooden frame. Morenike jumped back in shock, then another, and another. She heard the murmurs outside. Men, perhaps 5 or 6 of them, all there to intimidate her. Her mother whimpered in fear. "Morenike, do not open the door!" "I will not, Mama." Then a voice from outside, different from Babaluku's, spoke. "Burn it." "Mon What? Babaluku chuckled darkly. "You will learn your place." A sudden flicker of orange light illuminated the cracks in the wooden door.
They were setting the house on fire.
Panic surged through Morenike's veins. Her mother was too weak to run. Their only way out was the front door, but it was surrounded. "Lord, help us!" she cried. She rushed to the back window, but the flames were already licking at the sides of the house. The smoke thickened, filling her lungs. Her mother coughed violently. "We have to get out!" Morenike said desperately, wrapping a cloth around her mother's face.
Them!
The front door burst open. Through the smoke, Morenike saw a figure rushing in. Damila. "Come quickly," he shouted, grabbing her mother in his arms. Morenike followed, barely able to see through the haze. As they stumbled outside, she saw the men standing there, torches still in hand. Damila's face burned with righteous anger. "Cowards! You would kill a sick woman and her daughter." For the first time, Babaluku looked uncertain. He had not expected intervention. From the shadows, villagers emerged, neighbours, church members, young men who had been silent too long. "This is wrong. This is wickedness. She has done nothing to deserve this." The tide had turned. Babaluku hissed. "This is not over." And with that, he disappeared into the night. The next morning, the remnants of Morenike's home lay in ashes, but her faith remained unshaken. As the church members gathered around her offering prayers and shelter, she knew one thing for sure. God was with her, and he was not done yet. Episode 2, Chapter 8, The Mission House. Lagos was not new to Morenike. She had walked these streets before, felt the heat of its sun, heard the restless chatter of its people, and seen the endless rush of its traffic. She had left this city once, years ago, when her mother fell ill, trading its opportunities for the quiet struggle of village life. Now she was back. But this time, everything felt different. The Danfo bus pulled to a stop near a row of aging buildings, and Damila helped Morenike and her mother down. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and fried plantain from a roadside vendor. Mama Fumile's nephew, Pastor Ifemi, was waiting for them by the entrance of the mission house, a modest 2-story building painted in a fading shade of white. The cross above the doorway bore the words, "House of Mercy Mission." You are welcome," Pastor Ifemi said warmly, his deep voice steady and kind. "Come inside." The moment they stepped through the doors, a wave of peace washed over Morenike. The mission house was simple but well kept. The scent of freshly cooked rice lingered in the air, and in the common room a few women sat quietly reading their Bibles. "You will be safe here," Pastor Ifemi assured them. "This place is for people who need rest, healing, and a fresh start." Morenike turned to her mother, who looked exhausted from the journey. The pain in her eyes was evident, but so was the relief. They had made it. That night, as Morenike lay awake on the small mattress in their shared room, she reflected on everything that had happened. Babaluku had tried to break her. He had burned their home, forced them to flee, and tried to silence her faith. But God had led her back to Lagos, not as a broken girl, but as a woman with purpose. She glanced at her mother, whose soft breathing was steady beside her. She had come to Lagos once before for her mother's sake. Now she was here for something greater. She didn't know what awaited her in the days to come. But one thing was certain. God was not done with her story yet. Episode 2, Chapter 9, A New Beginning. Morning in Lagos was loud. The call of street hawkers, the honking of impatient drivers, and the steady hum of life filled the air. But inside the mission house all was calm. Morenike woke to the soft murmur of prayers. Somewhere in the building a woman was singing a hymn, her voice low but steady. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw her mother lying beside her, still asleep, her chest rising and falling with a peaceful rhythm. The events of the past few days rushed back. Fire, the journey, their arrival in Lagos. This was their new life now. By mid-morning, Pastor Efemi gathered everyone in the mission house for prayers. There were about a dozen people, some elderly women, a young mother with a baby, and a few others who had nowhere else to go. The mission house was a place of refuge, a temporary home for those in need. God has a plan for each of you, Pastor Efemi said after reading from Jeremiah 29:11. Even in hardship, he is working things out for your good. Morenike held on to those words. She needed to believe them. After prayer, she helped serve breakfast in the small kitchen. The women welcomed her warmly, and even though she was still adjusting to this new place, she felt a quiet sense of belonging. "Thank you, my dear," an old woman smiled as Morenike handed her a plate. "You are a blessing." Morenike returned the smile. Maybe this was where she was meant to be. Later that afternoon, as she sat by her mother's bedside, Damila knocked softly and entered. "How is Mama?" he asked. Morenike sighed. "She is resting. The journey was hard on her." "She is strong. She will recover." There was a brief silence before he spoke again. "I will be returning to Abakot soon," looked up sharply. "So soon?" "I have to," he said gently. "My work is there." She felt a pang of sadness but nodded. "Thank you, Damila," she said, "for everything." He smiled. "God led us here, Morenike. He will continue to lead you." As she watched him leave, she realized something. Lagos was not just a place of refuge. It was the beginning of something new. Episode 2, Chapter 10, Full Circle. The city of Lagos had always been a place of survival for Morenike. The first time she fled here, she was just a scared village girl with nowhere to go. She had arrived with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a heart heavy with pain. She had wandered the streets hungry and lost, until she found herself in a small church on the outskirts of Mushin. That was where she met Mama Kemi. A kind woman with a deep love for God, Mama Kemi had taken her in without hesitation. "God does not abandon his children," she had said, offering Morenike food and a place to rest. With Mama Kemi's help, she found work at a local buka, washing dishes and running errands. The pay was meagre, but it was enough to survive. Lagos had toughened her, taught her resilience, but when she received news that her mother was sick, she had left everything behind and returned to Abakot. And now here she was again, back in Lagos. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had come with her mother, and the circumstances were even more dire.
The struggle in Lagos.
Life in the mission house was safe, but it was not easy. There were too many people and not enough food. Every day new faces arrived, and Pastor Efemi did his best to accommodate everyone. Morenike helped in every way she could, cooking, cleaning, and caring for the elderly women who stayed there. But deep down, she knew she could not stay here forever. Her mother's health was improving, but she needed proper care, medicine, and a better living condition. One evening, as she sat outside with her mother, she voiced her thoughts. "Mama, I need to find work." Adun turned to her with tired eyes. "You have done enough, Omotmi."
No, Mama!
"I need to do more." Aduni smiled weakly. "You are just like your father." Morenike's heart ached at the mention of her father. She had barely known him, but from everything her mother told her, he had been a hard-working man who never turned away from responsibility. The next morning she woke up early, determined to find work. She walked through the familiar streets, memories flooding back.
The buka, Mama Kemi,
Could they still be there? After an hour of walking, she finally found it. The small buka where she had once worked. It still looked the same, the wooden benches, the smoky air, the loud voices of hungry customers. She stepped inside hesitantly. Mama Tone, the owner, was still there, yelling at a young girl to hurry up with the dishes. Morenket took a deep breath.
Maiko!
Mama Toon turned, squinting at her.
Ah, yes, ma, it's me!
The older woman gasped. Jizu, where have you been? Moret smiled, unable to explain everything in one sentence. Mama Toon shook her head, wiping her hands on her wrapper. You disappeared. I thought something bad had happened. I had to return home. Mama Toon studied her. You need work? Morenket nodded. The woman sighed. Come tomorrow morning. Gratitude filled her chest. God was making a way. That night, she returned to the mission house, exhausted but hopeful. When she told her mother, Aduni smiled. God has not forgotten us. But Lagos was a city of struggles. Working at the buka was draining. She woke up before dawn, walked long distances, and worked tirelessly under the scorching sun. The pay was still small, but she saved every naira she could. One evening after work, she decided to visit Mama Kemi. Finding her house was easier than she expected. The moment the older woman saw her, she burst into tears.
Morenike, my daughter! I thought I lost you!
Morenke hugged her tightly. I am here, Mama. Mama Kemi took her inside, giving her a plate of food, just like she had done the first time they met. When Morenike explained everything, Mama Kemi sighed. You and your mother should not be suffering like this. Then she did something unexpected. She offered them a place to stay. Come home, my dear, she said. This mission house is not your home. You belong here. Morenike's eyes filled with tears. She could not believe it. The next morning, with the help of Pastor Ifemi, she and her mother moved out of the mission house and into Mama Kemi's small but warm home. It felt like coming home.
Climax!
One evening, as she was returning from work, she heard someone call her name. She turned and saw a familiar figure walking toward her.
Damilala!
She was stunned. What are you doing here? He smiled. I had to see how you were doing. Her heart pounded. He looked different, tired but happy. They sat on a bench by the roadside and he told her everything. Babaluku had been exposed, his lies, his evil deeds, everything. The church had finally removed him from power. Bakot was changing. Tears rolled down Morenike's face. She had thought she had lost everything, but God had been working behind the scenes all along. Damilala hesitated, then said softly, You don't have to run anymore, Morenike. She looked at him, confused. It's safe to go home now. Her heart ached at his words. Home. For months she had believed she would never return to Abakwa. Lagos had become her place of survival, but could she truly start over there? Or was God calling her back? She'd left everything once before. Could she do it again? She looked up at the sky, whispering the same prayer she had prayed so many times before. Lord, lead me. Please follow us, leave a comment and share. Episode 2 premieres tomorrow. Be sure to tap the notification icon to get alerted on February 14th, 2025, when it goes live.